lessons. We're going to talk about morality. What is good and evil? This has to do with the problem of evil. What is evil? And we see evil all around us. What does that mean? How do we deal with it? What is our answer for the problem of evil? The problem of evil is the most pervasive argument used against Christianity. This is a serious issue that we need to think carefully about. It also causes the most doubts among Christians. People ask the question, if there's a good God, why is there evil in the world? Or why did this bad thing happen to me if God loves me? And questions like that cause a lot of problems for people. And it raises doubts in their minds, and it becomes a stumbling block. And they may, some people even may say, I'm done with this, you know. I don't believe, if God doesn't help me deal with this problem, I don't believe in God anymore. So this is a very serious problem that we need to think carefully about. What is evil? Well, most obviously, if there's good, there must be evil. If there's evil, there must be good. You cannot have good without evil. You cannot have evil without good. By definition, it is the opposite of good. What should not be? What is unpleasant, harmful, or deadly? Evil is not a thing, but a corruption of the good. When God created the heavens and the earth and animals and people, remember what Genesis said. At the end of the day, God said, this is good. And then on the sixth day, after he finished creating Adam and Eve, he said, this is very good. And so at the beginning, there was good, but then there was a distortion. Something happened to the good creation. There was a corruption, or you can think of other kinds of words there, like depravity, perversion, immorality. Something happened to the good, and that's Genesis chapter 3. Evil results as a misuse of the will that is set against God's will. So think about that one carefully. Evil results from misusing our free will. So God has given us choices, and we reject God and God's will, and we go our own way. That, and the result of that is evil. There are three types of evil, especially the first two are often pointed out. One type of evil is called moral evil. These are the bad choices that people do to hurt one another or themselves. We might call this human evil. Many sins are bad choices that people make. And so you have to think about this for a second. There are some, well, we all have problems, right? We all have problems, and we all get ourselves into trouble for in various ways. We get ourselves in trouble. We have pain, we have sorrow, all kinds of things. Some of those are because of our own choices. Okay, those things are called moral evil. The second type is called natural evil. This is what happens in nature. For example, a typhoon comes through and blows down your house and maybe kills your child. Well, that's a natural experience. In some insurance policies I've had in the past, there's this clause that says in the insurance policy, it says, like for a house, the insurance company would not cover acts of God, like a tornado or a typhoon or a flood. And so they attribute all those to acts of God. These are just things that happen in nature. Now, natural evil can come as a result of people. For example, sin or the sin of Adam. When Adam and Eve sinned, something happened in creation. Whoa. When Adam and Eve sinned, something bad happened in nature. We get a hint of that in Romans chapter 8, verses 18 and following, where Paul talks about how nature is waiting and groaning for the revelation of God's children. So there's something about nature that we're the cause of, but there's other things that are just the way it rains. So if it rains too much, and if you build your house by the river, well, whose fault is that? Is it the river, the rain, or yours? Well, that's very obvious. It would be your fault because you built right next to a river that floods every year. A lot of natural evil actually is our own problems. It's where people build houses. If you choose to live in a place where there's lots of earthquakes, and the house falls in on you, whose fault is that? Well, you could have lived someplace else where there's no earthquakes. If you choose to live by the Mayan volcano and it blows its top and it covers your house with ash or lava, whose problem is that? Is it the volcano or yours? Well, probably yours because you chose to live by a volcano. So this one's a little tricky. Sometimes people attribute natural evil, or they say evil things because of nature when it's a lot of times their own doing. And then there's another form of evil. It's called gratuitous evil. It's pointless and serves no good. There's just nothing, you can't really explain it. It's evil that just destroys. Sometimes things like, I don't know, what would be an example of gratuitous evil? Let me do an internet search real quick. Example of gratuitous evil. Let's see real quick. What does that say? Okay, gratuitous evil and the burden of proof. Examples. All right. Gratuitous evil. Examples of gratuitous evil. Let's see what that says. For example, every time a tree falls upon and kills a raccoon in the forest, or I get a headache, God allows it in order to bring about some clandestine that's hidden greater good at some unspecified point in the world. Okay, so a tree falls and kills the animal. Why? That's called gratuitous evil. All right, so these kinds of three categories of evil. Epicurus, who was a famous philosopher, I think he lived before Jesus, and the problem of evil. Can God prevent evil or unwilling to prevent evil? There's the question. Can God prevent evil, or is he unwilling to prevent evil? You understand the difference between those two? Is God able to do it? Well, if he is able to do it, why doesn't he do it? If God is able to stop evil, why does he not stop it? If God is able, but does nothing about it, then he is malevolent. That means evil himself. If he is willing, but unable, then he is impotent. That means weak. The Greek philosopher Epicurus originated the argument when he asked, is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then where does evil come from? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? So these are serious questions that have bothered people for a long time. I'll just summarize it simply. If God is all good and all powerful, why does God not stop evil? Either God does not want to stop evil, or God is unable to stop evil. So we have to look at those two options. Or there is no God, and evil is just part of the world. So we have to think about those options, and don't think simply from your perspective. Think about the world and the people around you. That's why we're doing apologetics. It's not just for me and my faith, but we're trying to deal with what people think around you. What are the people around you thinking and asking? The problem of evil. The classical logical problem of evil. God is said to be all-powerful and all-good, yet evil exists. Thus, it seems either God does not want to prevent evil, in which case God is not all good, or God is incapable of preventing evil, and thus not all-powerful. So we've got two problems now. If evil exists, then why does God not prevent evil? If he does not want to stop evil, then he's not good, because if he was good, he would stop evil. If God is incapable of stopping evil, then he's not all-powerful. The evidential problem of evil. Evil on its own may not prove that God does not exist. But it seems that surely the amount of evil should be less than what we observe. Surely God is capable of reducing the amount of suffering by just one less child being beaten, or one less tsunami killing hundreds. The very pervasiveness of evil, that means there's so much of it, makes it clear that no good God exists. So here they look at the evidence of evil. There's so much evil around us. If there was a God, he would deal with it and lower the amount of evil. But evil seems to actually be increasing. A God who claims to be powerful, good, and wise, and yet inside his creation there exists rampant evil. How does it fit together? Is there a way to resolve this tension? So does everyone understand the problem? This is called the problem of evil. How do we deal with it? What is a Christian response to this? The problem of evil revolves around three biblical claims about God. So let's look up some of these. The scriptures teach that, number one, God is all powerful. So turn to the book of Nehemiah. Chapter 9, verse 6. Nehemiah 9:6. You are the Lord, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve all of them, and the host of heaven worships you. Psalm 33, verse 9. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. Talking about the earth. Isaiah 44, verse 24. Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by himself. Romans 1:20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And then Colossians 1:6 and 7. Which has come to you, as indeed in the whole world is bearing fruit and growing, as it does among you since the day you heard it, and understood the grace of God in truth. No, that should be 16. Sorry. 16 and 17. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So God is all powerful. He just simply spoke the world into existence. Let's look at the next idea. God is all good. Psalm 100, verse 5. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Psalm 145:17. The Lord is righteous in all his ways, and good and kind in all his works. Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. And that's probably enough for those. So God is all good, and God is all wise. Now this will be an important one for us because there are some different ideas about how much God knows. So let's look at this one. Job 12:13. With God are wisdom and might. He has counsel and understanding. Proverbs 2:6-7. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. Daniel 2:20. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. And then Romans 16:27. To the only wise God be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen. And James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. So these are three really basic and crucial affirmations about God in the Bible. God is omnipotent. He is omnibenevolent. What's the word? Omnibenevolent and omniscient. If these things are true, then why is there evil? The presence of evil has to challenge one of these claims. If it doesn't deny the existence of God formally, it does functionally. If an here's that word, omnibenevolent, benevolent means good, and omni means all. If an omnibenevolent, omnipotent being exists, then to say that God does not want to prevent evil seems false. While to say that God is incapable of preventing evil is also false. So if God is all good, he doesn't want evil. And if God is all powerful, then he is capable of stopping it if he wanted. Thus, there would have to be a third option. Perhaps God has reasons for allowing evil, and we just cannot understand them. Inscrutable means we cannot understand God's reasons. Perhaps the free will defense succeeds, and we're going to talk about free will in just a little bit. If we say God is good, then we commit to a certain presupposition that influences how we view evil. When we see evil in the world, we assume that God has a reason for allowing that evil to exist. Okay, so these 2 points are really important. Let's back up so you understand. We believe God's all-powerful. We believe that God's all good. And we believe he's all wise. If that's the case, then when we see evil around us, we have to assume that God has a reason for allowing it there. All right? Any questions about that? This is all kind of step-by-step logic. We haven't answered the question yet, why, but at least we know that God is allowing it.
This usually happens, Doctor, for some circumstances in life, such as someone who wants a shallow belief in God, but then again, someone from a immediate family died. Then there would be a question to God, or a question to God, why did he allow things to happen? Why did he is taking life?
Yes, so that's another question we have to think about. So if this is true, that God has a reason for allowing it, then why? And people like to ask that question a lot when they go through suffering. Why, God, are you allowing this to happen? That's usually one of the first questions when someone, maybe a loved one dies, or perhaps something, some illness, some car accident, whatever it might be. And, I've asked that question too myself. Why, God, did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow my mother to die from cancer? So we'll see if we can come up with some possible answers in the next couple weeks. Well, here's a perspective from atheists, okay? So let's think about the topic of the reality of evil. Richard Dawkins, the noted atheist and evolutionary biologist, in his book, The God Delusion, writes, "Without God, there is no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." So from an atheist perspective, there's no such thing as good and evil. It's just the way nature goes. If you do not believe in God, you don't need to worry about evil or good. It's just the way things are. Similarly, Fyodor Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist and philosopher, wrote, "If there is no God, everything is permissible." So let's think about that one for a minute. How does our ethics, or let me restate that. How does this idea about good and evil and God's existence affect our ethics? Well, if we do not believe in God, we do not believe in evil or good, it's just whatever happens. I can do whatever I want. Maybe I'll be kind because I don't want to hurt someone, because I don't want them to hurt me back. But I can live my life however I want. So if you take God out, you can do anything you want. There is no truth anymore. Jeremy Rifkin, the American evolutionist, in his book Alchemy, wrote, "We no longer believe ourselves to be guests in someone else's home, and therefore obliged to make our behavior conform to a set of pre-existing cosmic rules." Basically, I don't need to conform my life to some arbitrary rule maker in the universe. I can live by my own rules. It is our creation now. We make the rules. We establish the parameters. We create our own world. Because we do, we no longer have to justify our behavior. We are the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside ourselves. For we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. So from an evolutionary perspective, from an atheistic perspective, I'm my own boss. I set my own truth. And this is the illness, we could say, this is the illness of postmodernism and what's going around the world today. Okay. Any comments or questions so far?
What is postmodernism again, please?
Okay. Well, that's a very complicated thing to answer, but basically, it's where absolute truth now is questioned. There is no ultimate truth. Truth is what it is for your own situation. We cannot know the truth beyond our own situation. So your truth may not be my truth. All I can know is, what I think. So postmodernism questions things like that. And it's kind of, have you heard of the word relativism? Truth is relative now. It's not absolute. And so whatever I want to think, I can live. It's all about. So one of the effects of this is we live in a me generation. What can I get out of life? It's all about me. Make my life comfortable, and so on. Yeah, it's very self-centered. So that's kind of a real simple summary. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's move on to some more ideas. The Bible shows that evil is real. Some religions claim that evil is only an illusion. For example, some of the religions we looked at last week, remember some of these up here? We talked about truth and values, especially pantheism. Pantheism would say that truth is, that evil is does not exist. In order for evil to be a problem, it can't just be an illusion. So pantheistic religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, believe that evil is just an illusion. That it's not, that's just something that people make up. But there must be objective evil, which requires that there must be objective goodness. For evil cannot exist without something to pervert. In other words, if there's evil, there's got to be good. You can't have one without the other. Well, you can have good without evil. And that's what God will have in the end is, it's good. And he started off with good. We can have good without evil, but we cannot have evil without good. Otherwise, we have what's called dualism. Dualism is where you have good and evil, and they're always fighting for eternity. So you got the devil and God. They're mortal enemies. Sometimes God wins, sometimes the devil wins. That's called dualism. Christians are not dualists. And the book of Job tells us that God is always in control. And Satan and evil are always under his sovereignty. So we are not dualists. Satan is not equal to God. Evil is not equal to good. Could God eradicate, that means get rid of, all evil in the world immediately? Yes, he could. Absolutely. But that would mean destroying all of us, because we are all fallen sinners. If God destroyed evil, then we would cease to exist. God has chosen to allow evil to exist in order to show his glory, power, and love. So that's an important point to remember right there. Okay? Why is there evil in the world? Why has God allowed evil to exist? In order to show his glory, power, and love. God is able to take painful and evil events and use them for good. Let's look at a couple of these passages. Genesis 50, verse 20. Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me. This is Joseph talking to his brothers. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So let's think about that story. Joseph was beaten up and thrown into a pit by his brothers and sold into Egyptian slavery. That's pretty evil. You know, that's not a nice thing to do. So the brothers did an evil act. Yet, God used that evil act, and because God is sovereign, God used that evil act for something good. Now that good is not seen yet. It would not be seen until, you know, Joseph died and for the next several hundred years. And in fact, the good of that would actually not be seen for generations, or the good of it was actually worked out for, you know, hundreds of years later. Joseph did not know that when he was sitting in the pit, you know, and his brothers were, you know, deciding what to do with him. Joseph did not know that when he was sitting in prison, or other things that happened to him. But God used that evil act for something good. Let's turn then to Proverbs 16:4. Proverbs 16:4. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. So God can make something, or he's made wicked for the day of trouble. Now, does that mean God is the author of wickedness? I don't think we need to push it that far. But God is sovereign, and he allows those things to happen in his timing, in his way. Now that's a hard verse to interpret, isn't it? Think about that. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Now the wicked would choose their own way of wickedness. God doesn't cause them to be wicked. Those are choices people make to walk away from God's law. There's a lot of verses, especially in Proverbs, that talk about wickedness and turning your back on God. But God knows what they're doing, and he will hold them accountable for that. All right, let's turn to a favorite in the book of Romans. Everyone likes to quote this one. Romans 8:28.
And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
Yeah, so let's look at that one a little closer. So God works all things together for good. That means the bad things that happen to us, just like with Joseph, God can turn those around. Why? Because he's sovereign. He's in control. Yeah, that's a good, so these are good passages for us to think about. All right, the point being that, unlike so many religions and philosophies, the Bible is clear that evil is real, that it has a purpose, and that God is in control, despite what we feel. we can look at the story of Job, the example of Job. In chapter 1, Satan goes up to God and negotiates with God and wants to put Job to the test. An important thing about that, though, is that Satan has to ask permission of God. Satan cannot do something without God's approval. Yeah, so think about that for a minute. Satan is not an independent agent. Sometimes in our faulty mythological thinking, we think that God and Satan are just having a battle up there. That's not what Job teaches. There is no battle. Satan has to ask approval of God to go out and cause evil in Job's life. And then in Job chapter 1, verses 13 through chapter 2, verse 10, and this is really from a human perspective, we find that there are things we do not understand in this world. How could all this bad stuff happen to Job? You know, he loses family and his wealth, his health. All this is gone from him. And he's left destitute and sick and without all the things he had before. In this story, we see both natural evil and moral evil. So natural evil, so moral evil, there's a story of that his oxen are stolen and his servants struck down and killed. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep. That's probably a little bit more of a natural evil. So his camels are raided, and more of his servants are struck down by the Chaldeans. His sons and daughters were eating and drinking, and a great wind came through, so that's natural evil. Destroyed the house and killed them. So two different kinds of evil here. We see human evil, moral evil, and natural evil. Then the next one, there are things in us we cannot process. And that's really the middle part of the book of Job. He has all of those arguments with his friends, and they circle around and talk about all these deep philosophical ideas, and they have they can't really come up with good, clear answers. Job's friends unsuccessfully try to figure out the suffering. And then the last part of Job, in chapters 38 through 41, God tells Job in these chapters, no one can know who I am, basically. God is beyond comprehension. There are things ahead of us we can't comprehend. Everything is silent when God speaks. God restores Job and overcomes evil with greater things. So the book of Job ends with Job having even greater things than what he started out with. God, who no one can understand, who is beyond our thinking and imagination, is more powerful than any evil we can face. And at the end of the story, Job is restored. this book of Job really helps us deal with the problem of evil. If you just step back and look at the major themes of the book. Okay, here's a good book. I wish we could get access to it. It's really big. I do not have a copy. I found it on the internet through Google Books, but only parts of it. So Grotius says, a good God will eliminate evil as far as he can without either losing a greater good or bringing about a greater evil. We would call that grace. God's grace is at work. God protects us from evil. God removes things from our life that would be too much for us. And he allows things in our life that will bring about a greater good if we trust in him. That's the hard part, though. How do we trust in God when we're in the middle of suffering? That's hard. And so that's a matter of faith. So let me read that again. A good God will eliminate evil as far as he can without either losing a greater good or bringing about a greater evil. All right. Well, let's think a little bit then about the problem of sin, and how does all of that fit into this? What we might call moral evil. Looking at the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. I just thought of an idea for the first time. I don't think I've ever thought of this idea before. God gave this command before Eve was ever created. So how did Eve learn about this command? Adam had to teach her. So when we come to chapter 3, the one who's really at fault is Adam. Now Eve did it too. Yeah, Eve was deceived, but maybe Adam didn't teach her enough about this. I was just thinking about that. I don't know. I'll have to file that away and think about it, because God gives the command and then Eve is created in verse 21 and 22. So Eve isn't even created when God gives that command. Interesting. Well, anyway, that's kind of a side note. I don't know if anyone's ever talked to me about that before. I'll have to look at a commentary about that. I'm kind of curious. Anyway.
Sir, that's the problem, because in the other book, in the New Testament, it says that it is the woman's, kasalanan. It's the sin of the woman. That's why we went into this. Actually, the command was given to man. So it should be the man who must be blamed, not us.
Yeah, well, God cursed both man and woman, so I guess they're both to blame. But anyway, just curious about that. It's kind of that's what I call speculation, and I try not to do that too much.
Some are using it because they said the men listened to the woman. There's this thing there. The man listened to the woman. That's why he fell. And so what happens was there's a turnabout that they are not to listen to women.
Mm. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to kind of misinterpret and twist the story for your purpose, your own purpose. All right. Well, why did God give them this one command in the garden? Not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's one thing they were not to do. It was really a test. It was a test to see how much they would love and honor God, worship Him. If they loved God, they would obey His command. Just like Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my command. Well, if they loved God, they would keep His command. But they chose not to. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 to 5, the serpent's false claim said, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." There's the problem. Knowing good and evil. And I think it's more than just simply up in the head. This knowledge would be experienced too. You know, they would be experiencing this, and they could not handle that. They thought that life would be better knowing good and evil. God was not acting, they thought that God was not acting on their best interest. They needed to do things their own way. They felt that God was holding something back from them. What is God hiding? You know, what is this good and evil that we could know about? Let's find out what this good and evil is about. Let's open our eyes and let's look. The results, their eyes were open. When the woman saw, you know, that word saw, her eyes became bigger. And that it was a delight to the eyes. That's the second time talking about eyes. And the tree was to be desired the third time. She took of its fruit and ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And then the eyes, that's the fourth time, were opened. 4 times has to do with the eyes in this passage. Their eyes were open. They did not feel like gods, but they felt naked and ashamed instead. They no longer could commune or fellowship with God. Their punishment. God's punishment explains why we suffer. So let's think about this not in the perspective of sin, which we usually do, but think of it in this terms of suffering and the pains and the sorrows we go through. Verse 14 talks about the curse to the serpent. So we'll go to verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman. So now we have a relationship problem. And ever since then, people have not gotten along very well. About every other day, there's a war someplace in the world. And between your offspring and her offspring, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So enmity came into the world, and this is between the serpent and people, but that part of that could be also creation. Creation suffered. something at that point. Verse 16, I will multiply your pain in childbirth. So now we have pain in childbirth. That accounts for the reproductive problems and pains that are in the world. Everything from ovarian cancer to miscarriages to childbirth to the monthly women's cycle. All of that, part of this problem. So if there's a problem in childbirth, is it God's fault? It's part of the curse.
But the real problem, sir, is next line. Even if we undergo all of these things, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you.
Yeah, so that's the next one. Man ruling over woman. Broken relationships and exploitation. Yeah, isn't that a big problem today? How many women suffer because of this?
It is a problem because the husband becomes an obsession.
Uh-huh. And so if you are a woman who has an abusive husband, is that God's fault?
No, it's hard to live because we are enslaved by a certain curse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of sin. It's really the effects of sin. Let's go on to the number 3 here on the list. Man having to work hard to survive. God said to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. So man now has to work hard to survive. And there's a lot of pain in that, isn't there? A lot of pain and sorrow. How much of our pain and sorrow in this life is due to having to work? I think of, when I lived in the Philippines and I saw some of these tricycle drivers who'd go in our neighborhood. And there was one guy, he must have been 85 years old, and he just went so slow. I'm glad he had a job. I was thankful for that. But I thought, he doesn't look very happy. He might not have been 65. Maybe he was 60. But, he looked old. He looked like he was in pain. And that's just how it is with so many of our jobs. So many people have, when they get older, they have problems because of the job they had. If you were a construction worker, probably a pretty good chance you'll have arthritis, or other kinds of ailments because you had a certain type of job. Yeah, so nowadays we call that workplace hazards or something like that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could... Yeah, go ahead.
Or workaholic. Men becomes workaholic because of this curse. The priorities now become different.
Yes, we can go to the opposite side and get so busy we don't care for our families. We don't take care of our health. We are what's the idea? We are controlled by materialism. I'm going to work 3 jobs so I can afford, a cell phone or a car payment or a nicer house or whatever. Or everyone in the house works, the mother, the father, the children, just so that they can have something nicer. Yeah. So a lot of our problems are due to having to work hard. Number 4, God cursed the earth because of Adam's sin. And this is the origin of natural evil. So now the ground does not cooperate with us. There are thistles and weeds when we try to grow a garden or we grow our crops. Something is desperately wrong with creation. Let's turn to Romans chapter 8. I mentioned that already, but let's just go look at it. Chapter 8, verses 19 to 23. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So nature is subject to decay. Things fall apart. They don't improve. Not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Okay, number 5, death entered the world. Romans 5:12. Therefore, as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all people, all men, because all have sinned. Have you ever thought about how much of what we do fights off death? Almost everything we do in life fights off death in one way or another.
What do you mean by that, sir? Fights of death?
Okay. Did you eat today?
Yes, sir.
Why did you eat?
Yes, sir. You're hungry.
What happens if you don't eat?
Your...
What happens if you... And then what?
And then if you really don't care for your health, then you'll deteriorate and die.
Right. So we eat. Why do we breathe? We breathe so we don't die. Why do we take medicine? So we don't die. Why do we sleep at night? So we don't die.
Restore.
So there's, maybe not 100, not every single thing we do. I mean, we have fun times and things like that. But think about it. How much of our day do we fight off the effects of death? When you think about it, we're tired. Well, why are we tired? Because death is trying to creep up on us. Why do we eat? Because our body is telling us if we don't, we're going to be in trouble. And you just go down the list. That's why, by the way, it's hard for us to imagine what it will be like with no more death in heaven. What will it be like? Because so much of our life right now is wrapped up fighting off death. Now, when we're young, we don't think about it. But as we get older, we start to think about it more. Yeah. Okay. And then number 6, banishment from the source of eternal life. This is a hard truth that every person will die. No way around it, except if Jesus comes again. But all of us will die at one point.
It's inevitable not to die because that's our gateway to heaven.
Yeah, I mean we have to die unless Jesus comes back and we're alive. Otherwise, We cannot freeze our bodies. You know, sometimes these scientists are trying to figure out how to freeze a body and bring it back to life. It won't work. You know, we can try to keep our brain alive. Eventually it'll die. They can hook you up to machines. Eventually you'll die. So that's the hard truth. This set us on a path of trying to figure out what is good and evil. Ever since Adam and Eve, we have been trying to figure this out as human beings. The Bible is all about helping humanity come to know the difference between good and evil and what to do about it. If we did not have the Bible, we would not know so much about good and evil. We would know a little bit, you know, by human logic and looking at nature. What we call general revelation, we could know a little bit about good and evil, but the Bible helps us to know more. The Bible is God's answer for that curse. So the problem was that Adam and Eve came to know what good and evil is. Well, if God did not direct that, the human race would go off and end up destroying itself. By giving us what good and evil is in the Bible, we now can follow the right path. And so let's go up to our question up here that we started off with. What is good and evil? We could ask the question, how do we know what is good and evil? We know that by the Bible. So, how do we know what is good and evil? By God's special revelation in the Bible. That is why, by the way, Psalm 119 is full of praise of God's law. Because God's law is the source of life for us. We cannot get back to the tree of life. But God has given us another way to life. The Bible's witness of salvation. Well, we have two problems. Number one, we fail to take sin seriously. We just kind of, it doesn't matter too much how you live. And sometimes even Christians, we don't take sin seriously enough. We have to take it seriously. And then we fail to realize the depth and power of God's saving grace. How could Adam and Eve sin if there was no sin in the world? Well, that's another hard question. Was there sin before Adam and Eve? Some people say, well, the serpent and Satan sinned. There's a little bit of evidence of that in Scripture. Okay. Let's see what C.S. Lewis says. Oh, you want to say something, Anna?
No, where? No, where? Where the sin exists in the perfect world?
It would be in the spiritual world, in Satan's disobedience and rejection of God. So that's just an idea. I'm not saying that's for sure, but that's one of the theories. Here's what C.S. Lewis suggests. The moment you have a self at all, there is the possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God. in fact. That was the sin of Satan. So C.S. Lewis is accepting that theory I just said. That was the sin of Satan, and that was the sin he taught the human race. So God created angels with some degree of self-will. And so anytime you create and so why did God do that? Well, because angels need to love God too. They have to choose to love God. They're not just robots. The scripture indicates to us that angels are sentient or thinking beings. If you are a thinking creature, then you have to have a self-will, and you have to have a self-will in order to choose to love. So Satan, then, according to Lewis here, wanted to be like God. And he put himself in front of God, and he taught the human race to do the same thing. So we could think about that one. I don't have too much material on that one, but you can do a little research if you want to follow up on that.
Yes, the evidence is 1/3 of the angels from heaven went with Lucifer because they're thinking angels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the idea behind that. And what passage is that? I think there's a passage where it talks about falling of the stars, and that then is interpreted to mean angels. But I think maybe Revelation, but someone can look that up if they want. Self-revelation may lead to the conclusion that God has kept something good from us. To see something inadequate in God and then to act in response is sin. What is sin? Thinking that something in God is imperfect, or that God is hiding something from us, or thinking that there's something more than what God is telling us. Another word for that is doubt. We doubt God's promises. We question God's goodness.
Being double-minded.
Go ahead, Michael.
Being double-minded, Doctor.
Okay, being double-minded, yeah. Mm-hmm. Being decides. Yeah. Go ahead.
Of course, when you're thinking, you have to think of all the possibilities, and that's not being double-minded. That is being a realist. So it should be okay if you think you might have thought that there must be something here hidden that we don't know or God has not told us about, but that is His sovereignty. He knows what to impart to us. But something went wrong along the way.
Yeah, doubt. The doubt begins very simple and small. It can just be a simple question. And simple questions are not wrong, but it's where they lead to. So a simple question like, God, why did you allow this? That can grow and become a bigger problem and lead to sin. And so the answer to that is faith. Now the prophet Habakkuk in the Old Testament, he questioned God. And so it's not wrong to question God, but it is wrong to act on that and to reject God's sovereignty, His love, and His grace. And that can become a problem when you turn your back and walk away. It's not wrong to come to God and say, God, crying out in prayer, why is this happening? But it becomes a problem when you reject God and walk away.
So that's the boundary line when you make a conclusion to reject.
I would suggest, yes, like here, this sign that says, evil moved from a possibility to a reality. Or we could say, it moved from temptation to actual sin. Now, we may be tempted to question God, and we're finite humans, and we're emotional creatures, and sometimes we have pain, and we just cry out to God. But it's another thing when Satan comes along and says, God's not real, or he doesn't care. Why do you put your faith in something you can't even see? Or why did God allow this to happen? He doesn't love you anymore. So we get these temptations that come our way. And if we listen to them, then we're just like Adam and Eve. And so we have to reject those. And how do we reject them? Well, our faith needs to be stronger. Now, sometimes we cannot stand on our own. And so we need a brother or sister to come alongside us and hold us up. Help us if we're limping spiritually. They hold us up. They walk with us. That's why we as the church, when we see someone suffering or someone who's lost a loved one, who's mourning, we need to come alongside of them and hold them up in their weakness. Because if we do not, and they're out there by themselves and they're weak, they're vulnerable. They're open to attack. And maybe you've seen this in people's lives, that when something bad happens, they turn away from God. And so we as the church can come around them and love them and support them. What do you think about that? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, but it made me think, sir, why is it that human beings, despite of all the goodness of God, we tend to give our loyalty, our full emotions of love to a finite person or a material being? So
Yeah.
that's and I know it has something to do with emotions, the feelings inside us. Even though we don't like it, we know what is right. We know that God is this. God is omnipotent. God is this. Is the one who truly loves us. But when we come into terms with reality, choosing between His will and another will, or our will, which we thought is also God's, we are very vulnerable to forsake God. There must be something that should strengthen us really to stand up for Him.
Yeah, I think the answer is in the spiritual disciplines, and spending time in God's Word and prayer, Christian fellowship, all the things that we do. Those are part of God's answer to us. That's why we say it's hard, very difficult to be a lone Christian. It's hard to be by yourself. That's why we really need each other. Are we guilty for Adam's sin? Theologically, we would say we're not guilty for his sin. But then the next question is, why do we suffer for it? If we're not guilty because for what Adam did, why are we suffering death? Or are we guilty? There's been two major explanations. First of all, is Adam as our federal head. Let me make that bold. Federal head. Adam chose to rebel against God, making rebels of his race. We are caught up in Adam. What he did, we would also do. For example, if we were in his place, we would do the same thing as he did. Okay, another option, realistic or seminal union with Adam. We were really present in Adam's loins when Adam sinned. We were ontologically present. The whole human race was caught up in his sin. Augustine took this position. So we in modern science, we might think, genetically, we were in Adam when he sinned. Okay, traducianism, from the Latin word for vine, that transfers its nature from root to leaf. After Adam and Eve sinned, they could only produce fallen humans. Because they were fallen, any of their offspring would also have to be fallen. They could not produce something better than themselves. We got our consciousness from our parents. We got our souls from Adam and Eve, and in a sense, we are Adam and Eve. So that's called traducianism. So actually there's three explanations here. These kind of go together. So this would be 1 and 2. So this is a subcategory of that. Let's move on to another topic, and this is one that I'll have you discuss as a small group. Let's do a little bit of background on it first. So there's some aspect of evil that is a result of our free will. Is God to blame for all the evil in the world? Or is some evil the result of human free will? This is related to some bigger questions. Does God know the future or determine the future? Because does God know everything that will happen in the future? A second question related to that, do humans have free will? If we have free will, how can God know what we will choose? So there's different perspectives about that. So there seems to be a conflict between human freedom and divine knowledge. How do these two fit together? If God knows everything in the future, doesn't that determine everything? So do I really have freedom if God knows what I'm going to choose? So that's a challenge. These are kind of philosophical questions, but they're important for us to think about in the context of apologetics. All right, I don't think we'll go over these passages, but I'll just talk about a few of them in general. So even within the Bible, we have this problem. First of all, we have determinism. Some passages show that God knows everything. Let's look at just a couple of them, for example. So Psalm 115, verse 5. Verse 5. They have mouths, but do not speak. All right, is that right? 15:3, sorry. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. No one can tell God what to do. Psalm 135, verse 6. Whatever the Lord pleases, he does, in heaven and on earth, in the seas and all the deeps. Isaiah 46, verse 10. Woe to him who says to a father, what are you begetting? Oh, no, wrong chapter, sorry. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purposes. That's a pretty significant passage there. God knows the beginning from the end and everything in between. Daniel 4:35. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say, what have you done? Okay, there's a lot of other passages, but clearly in these passages, God knows what's going to happen. He knows the past, he knows the future. But on the other hand, then, we have human freedom. Some passages show that people have free will. So let's look at Genesis 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. So God tested Abraham, and Abraham had to choose. Abraham always could have walked away. Proverbs chapter 1, 23 to 26. If ye turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you, and I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen. So we have a choice. We can accept God or reject him. That's free will. And have stretched out my hand, no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. I also will laugh at your calamity, and I will mock when terror strikes you. So we have a choice, and we have to suffer the consequences of that choice. Matthew 22, verse 3. Verse 3. And sent his servants to call on those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. So some people are invited, but they don't come. They have a choice. They can reject God. 23, verse 37. Next page. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. So Jerusalem, the Jews, they rejected God. They would not listen. And there's a lot of other passages that you can look at. Now, there's some passages that show both of these. So let's look at the story of Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 7. Verse 13 and 14. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. So in some places in this story, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. And then in other places in the story, it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, especially as we get towards the end. For example, in chapter 9, verse 12. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them as the Lord has spoken to Moses. So we get two perspectives here. On the one hand, Pharaoh makes his own choices. But on the other hand, his choices are determined by God. So we see this tension in the Bible. Well, in history of theology, we see that tension as well. Augustine sought to harmonize God's sovereignty with libertarian freedom. Later, he became more deterministic, but never fully rejected limited libertarian freedom on issues related to salvation. Pelagius rejected Augustine's doctrine of original sin. And so Calvinism follows Augustine to a great extent. Thomas Aquinas, nothing outside the person compels him to act, though one's inclinations do factor in. So Thomas Aquinas was more open to human free will. The Reformation, Desiderius Erasmus affirmed the libertarian freedom, but was unclear about the relationship between freedom and grace. Martin Luther argued largely against Erasmus that people only have freedom of the will regarding mundane, that's like everyday decisions. These decisions, however, could never have soteriological significance. So Luther leaned more towards God's sovereignty. Calvin, even more. John Calvin affirmed that God ultimately determined everything of heavenly significance. He also left room for earthly decisions to be made freely. With that said, he never figured out how to reconcile the two. So some things we're free to choose, like what kind of shirt I'm going to wear today. But when it comes to salvation, God chooses. So there we have what's called predestination or eternal election. God chooses some to heaven and some to hell. That's one of the points of Calvinism. Jacob Arminius, he insisted on the notion of double predestination, which is the idea that God specifically predestined both those persons who will be saved and those persons who will be damned. Jonathan Edwards found the idea of human free will impossible because he believes all decisions are determined by past decisions, and the first decision must have been caused by God. So